right now. So, okay, Joe, you can feel free to take it away here in just one. Go ahead. Yep, you're good, Joe.
Live from Houston, Texas. Welcome to the Sare for Senate Symposium with Diane Sare. We are in Houston, a city with a great history named for Sam Houston, a man of courage to whom John F. Kennedy devoted an entire chapter in his book, Profiles in Courage. This is the space city, the energy city, the biggest cargo port in the nation. But right now, this city is in the throes of something called March Madness. Today is March 31st, 2023. The Final Four basketball playoffs are taking place this weekend. So we thank you all for coming to hear Diane Sare this weekend. But we're told since today is March 31st and tomorrow is April 1st, March Madness will officially be over. April Fool. Diane is a woman we're delighted to welcome to our city of Houston. She took on the most powerful and possibly the most venal member of the U.S. Senate in last year's election, Chuck Schumer, and she is a candidate for Senate again. But her quality, which she carries around with her, is one of music. She is the founder of the Schiller Institute Chorus, which I have had the pleasure of traveling up there and singing the great works of Bach and Beethoven. But we have a world that has many discords right now, a lot of dissonances, a lot of cacophony. And so maybe Diane can give us some insight to how to bring some beautiful higher harmonies out of what might seem a rather raucous situation in the world. So with that, I would love for all of you to give a very, very warm welcome to Diane Sare. Thank you.
Great. All right, well, thank you. Thank you so much. I'm really glad to be here. And I and Jose Vega, who's also somewhat of a celebrity among the crowd here, came from New York, not because the district attorney, Alvin Bragg, is insane, but because we had planned to be here. But I do want to say something about this indictment of former President Donald Trump, because when we have a sitting president of the United States who is about 99.999% certain to have been directly involved, according to journalists, can they still hear me?
They can still hear you, yeah.
Okay, do you need to come on this side?
Yeah.
Okay.
But you can still be heard.
Okay, so I'm going to continue. According to Seymour Hersh, involved in the decisions to blow up the Nord Stream pipelines, and that being the largest act of infrastructure terrorism other than 9/11, which was buildings which had a much greater loss of life. But the fact that you have a sitting president who did that with Victoria Nuland and others, and the Manhattan DA is running a totally frivolous, politically motivated lawsuit, what is the purpose? The purpose is diversion. That's it. It is also meddling in the election. Who needs the Russians or the Chinese when we can meddle in our own elections perfectly well, and in fact is what has been going on for many years, because I'm sorry to say that there has been so little difference between the political leaders of each party. You have to ask, why would anyone need to meddle in our elections? Both choices are horrible, and both choices have policies that will lead us to war. And we have seen repeatedly that if there's anything that unifies our disunified Congress, it's voting for sanctions against helpless people like those in Yemen and Syria, and then sanctions against Russia, where you can get votes of 98-2 in the Senate or 413-3 in the House or something like that. But on anything of substance, there's no difference. So we are now at a point from which there is no return. And you have to think about, what are they trying to divert people from? And going back to my work of 33 years with the greatest American economist and statesman ever to live, Lyndon LaRouche, have to say that we are now in the moment for which he dedicated his life. That is, the breakdown of everything is upon us. Now, the breakdown has been upon us. It occurred in 2008. It began really in 1971 when President Nixon made the decision to decouple the dollar from the gold reserve system. And in a sense, what we've been watching unfold is a little bit like the Webb telescope. That is, we're seeing images of events that occurred maybe millions of years before. We are now seeing the result of the policies that were made, actually going back to the death of President Franklin Roosevelt, the J. Edgar Hoover McCarthyite witch hunts, the targeting of political leaders. We had a brief reprieve with President Kennedy, and he had a very short presidency. He was a president who was capable of avoiding a nuclear war with the Soviet Union. We don't have such leadership in the White House right now. So LaRouche warned that the system was going to blow out. And I've had some conversations with people because I don't think that everyone really understands what that means. If we don't take preemptive actions along the lines that LaRouche and his widow Helga Zepp-LaRouche are calling to reorganize the system, there is not a do-over. That is, this is not, well, the banks may collapse and things will be a little bit tough, but we can pull the pieces together and get by. There's a point, maybe everyone who ever had a car or responsibility for an automobile when you were a teenager discovered that if you don't change the oil for a certain amount of time, there is something that happens to the car that cannot be reversed. And if you consider what has happened to the state of the United States and our infrastructure and our culture and our morality, we either change our behavior or we may not exist. And the two things go together. The driver of the war policy, the policy of provoking Russia, of provoking China, of provoking nuclear superpowers, is the collapse of the economy. The collapse of the economy that was set into motion when Nixon decoupled the dollar from gold, and when we had the movement in the 1960s, the degenerate rock, drug, sex, counterculture movement, which said blue collar work is bad. Blue collar work is dirty. If you can just do white collar business work and figure out how to rip people off and make money, that's respectable. But we're not going to produce anymore. We're going to be consumers. Now, what is the mindset of a consumer? You sit there and you think things are going to come to you. You have no interest in how they are produced. How does the food arrive on your dining room table? We see this today in a horrible way because everyone likes to order on Amazon. So you sit at your computer, you place your order, and miraculously it shows up on your doorstep. Now, it may not occur to you that if the bridges collapse, if the price of gasoline is $12 a gallon and we run out of diesel fuel, that maybe one day when you sit at your computer and you order your whatever it is on Amazon that you needed to get right away, your infant formula, your dog food, your toothpaste, whatever it is, that it's not going to show up. And with what's happening with the banks, we saw what just happened with 4 banks, and there's been about $700 billion of bailouts. And we're supposed to believe, and governments are telling you, like the government of the Dominican Republic said, don't worry, none of our banks are contaminated. I'm sure that really reassured the people of the Dominican Republic. Oh, you don't bank at Silicon Valley Bank? Don't worry, there's no contamination. Well, I know people who bank at Bank of America, the too big to fail, too big to jail bank, who could not pay payroll because the electronic transfers from Bank of America went through Silicon Valley Bank. So all of a sudden, money that you thought you had, which you thought you were sending somewhere, disappears into cyberspace. So what are Americans going to think when they go to the ATM and they stick their card in and the machine gobbles up your card and a little face comes on and sticks its tongue out at you? What is going to happen when you go online to order on Amazon, and not only can they not deliver whatever your dog food because the bridges have collapsed, but they can't even process your credit card because there's no electronic transactions. These are the things that we are sitting on the cusp of. That is why they are indicting Donald Trump, because they want everyone to be very emotional about that and to not notice that everything that you think you can take for granted is disappearing out from under you. Now, we also, last Friday, and people watching this program from around the country, New York, saw this, but I had some public school teachers on from New York. And one of them, we were discussing, why is the death rate among 10 to 19-year-olds 20% higher now than it was a few years ago? For one thing, the suicides among children have tripled. Suicides have tripled. What is that? And then she went through, one of the teachers, all of the factors feeding into this: the drugs, the isolation, what happened during COVID, and the children got depressed and the parents got depressed. She said one thing that happened is when the children came home, the parents discovered that little Johnny did not even know how to hold a pencil, let alone write. Now in New York, and I don't know what they're doing in Texas, New York has a solution for all of this because everyone has lost about 2 years of school. And they already had terrible problems across the state of New York, and literacy rates, very, very low level. Children are very far behind. Parents are working 3 jobs. They're not reading books. Children get to first grade. They don't know the alphabet. It's already a mess. Yeah. But after COVID, the bottom dropped out on the standardized test scores. So what have they decided to do? They're going to rewrite the tests. They're going to say we have to lower the level of the tests so that the children can score the same 70% or whatever average they had pre-pandemic on the previous tests. Now, only a post-industrial consumer economy could come up with that, because it means that you don't care if Johnny or Susie knows how to read or knows how to add without a calculator. You just care how it looks on the test. You don't have to worry about whether the truck, I did a conference call with truckers from around the country. They told me that they routinely drive hundreds of miles out of their way because the bridges are going to collapse under the weight of the truck, and they have to find a bridge that will allow them to deliver their goods. So imagine if one of the bridges that's capable of bearing the load somehow falls apart. Where is the truck going to go? Where are they going to cross? That is how much on edge we are. And I really want to say that because Helga Zepp LaRouche, who wrote a very authoritative book on Hitler and how Hitler came to power, which bothered her greatly as a German citizen. I think many of us have considered, well, how was it that people in Germany let this happen? What did they really not know what was going on? Or well, early on, a lot of people said, well, we don't really like Hitler, but we'll just vote him out at the next election. But then there were no elections because someone burned down the parliament building, and he said, oh, it's the communists who burned down the parliament building, and I need dictatorial. We have an emergency. We have a state of emergency, and I need power to rule by decree, and we don't have time for democracy. We don't have time to let the Bundestag vote on policy. I need emergency powers. We now have a president of the United States hosting a so-called summit for democracy, claiming to be the democratic leader of the world, when we are about to outlaw TikTok. Our Congress has hauled Dorsey, Jack Dorsey, is that his name? The owner of Twitter, formerly before Elon Musk, Mark Zuckerberg. If you think Facebook and YouTube and Twitter have not been banning enough material already, then you should be with the Congress, because the Congress hauled these owners of private companies, supposedly, into Congress and said, you are not censoring people enough. You have to stop this. And we all know people get banned. You're not allowed to talk about the Nazi problem in Ukraine, not allowed to say it exists. So we are running around the world claiming that we are the leaders of democracy and that we are fighting the autocrats. Now, isn't it peculiar that in our great democratic nations, which are so free and so prosperous and so fair, you have 2 million plus people out in France, you have massive strikes in the UK, you have tens of thousands, the media suppresses it, so we don't really know when they're having a nurses strike in New York that they're having a teacher strike in California and they're having another strike somewhere else. Why are all these people, or Berlin had 50,000 people out in the streets? Why are the people living in the great Western democracies all out in the streets? And the people in China and the people in Russia are not all out in the streets. Well, maybe people in some of these countries actually feel like their government is looking out for their well-being. Whereas our sense in our republic is that our government is not looking out for our well-being. In fact, our government seems to be beholden to something else. And it's not another country. It's this financial entity. It's this 25-ton tick sitting on the back of a 10-pound chihuahua, which has basically sucked all the blood out of it and now has to go to nuclear war or something else to figure out how to get more. So we're at a point of no return. And I call this, it's up to the people. And I'm glad to have people here like Joel DeJean, who ran for Congress, like Joe Marcinkowski with Pax Christi, with people who have been active, because, you know, I'll tell you, around the world, the people of the world, one, they know that the United States is disintegrating. They know that we have mass shootings in our schools. They know that we have more people in prison per capita than any place in the world. They know that New York City smells bad. They know that our garbage sits on the street for many hours in giant piles before it gets picked up by the trash collectors, that our major cities are overrun by rats, that our children have tripled in the number of suicides. The whole world knows this. So why do you, Why do you think that they are turning to China and Russia, who actually have something to offer? Did you ever try being an ally of the United States? Oh, be our ally. Then what? Well, we'll poke your eyes out, punch you in the gut, and knee you in the groin, and enjoy that. And then when you're down, we'll stomp on your head, and you can be a great partner of the United States. The people of Germany are beginning to figure this out, right? They're paying double, triple, quadruple for energy. Luckily, it's been a very mild winter. Had it been much colder, perhaps the Germans would have woken up sooner. But a lot of them are asking the question, as our good friend Ray McGovern says, since Olaf Scholz, the chancellor, was standing next to Biden when he told the German reporter that if Russia invaded Ukraine, that the pipelines would be stopped. And the German reporter asked Olaf Scholz, what do you think of this? This is your pipeline, yours and Russia. The president of the United States says it would be stopped. And Scholz says, oh, yes, we do everything together with the United States. So the whole German population has to be wondering, what did he know? Was their chancellor in on it? Imagine that, the leader of your country agreeing to have your energy supply blown up, just so you could be cannon fodder for a nuclear war between NATO and Russia. Right? So the world knows this. They know this, but they also know that all of us are not in jail. That is, we have lost, our government is insane, but you can still demonstrate. Many of us have been on the streets. I spoke at the Rage Against the War Machine rally in Washington, D.C. We didn't get arrested. Jose has spoken to numerous congressmen, and he is here with us in Texas. He's not in jail. So the world knows that the American people can change their government. The world is wondering about the people of our nation, the same question that we wondered about the people of Germany. Why do you allow this? Why do you allow your government to kill 1 million people in Iraq? And no one goes to jail, even when Nancy Pelosi admits publicly that she knew, and the intelligence committees in Congress knew, there were no weapons of mass destruction. And we went to war and killed 1 million people. Madeleine Albright, why did she never go to jail? She said that the death of 500,000 Iraqis, well, it was difficult. I mean, I felt bad about killing 500,000 children, but I decided it was worth it. Yeah. How can so the world is looking at us. And that's why we have to act. And that's why we have to act as though our lives and everyone's lives depended on it, because we are not in the situation like some guy who's smoking, and then one day he has a heart attack and the medics work valiantly and they revive him and he recovers and he says, okay, I'm going to change my behavior. I'm going to stop smoking. The British are sending depleted uranium weapons to Ukraine. In Iraq, they did a study in Fallujah and other places where we use depleted uranium in Iraq. The rate of cancer went from 40 per 100,000 to 1,600 per 100,000. That is a 400-fold increase in cancer. We don't see any problem with sending this into the war for Ukraine to use against Russia, which, by the way, if they're blowing up Russian tanks, which are in what they consider Ukraine, guess who's getting all the radiation? Think about it. So, and what is Russia doing? Well, Russia is now using Kinzhal hypersonic missiles because they're trying to get a message through some very thick heads in Washington, D.C., that they have more advanced weapons than we do, that they could knock out the White House, and Medvedev, who's more aggressive than Putin, more blunt, said, we are sending submarines to within 100 miles of the coast of the NATO countries. If you have a hypersonic missile and launched from a nuclear submarine, a Zircon missile, it's going to hit the target in less than 4 minutes. That's less than the amount of time that the president would have to respond to order a counterstrike. If we get to that point, there is no do-over. This is not, oh, well, and when it really gets bad, we'll all wake up. We're there now. We're there now. And therefore, all of us have to change our behavior, because even if the rest of the world didn't think we were responsible for what our government is doing, the truth of the matter is that we, the American people, are probably the only force on the planet that can change what our government is doing. And we have to. Now, the other part of what I wanted to say, this phrase has been in my mind since my last campaign against Schumer, which is selling your birthright for a mess of pottage. What is that? Well, you say, I'm really starving right now, so I'll just take this little, cup of stew, rather than recognize that the entire rotten system is coming down. And if we seize the action now, we can change the future for 1,000 years. So what we have to worry about is not, gee, I really wish I could pay my mortgage this month, but what is our nation going to look like when we have 1 billion people? Shouldn't we have 1 billion people living in the United States? Sure. What kind of infrastructure do we need? What, shouldn't we have high-speed rail? Shouldn't we have trains that go 1,000 miles an hour in vacuum tunnels? Shouldn't we have figured out how to grow potatoes on the moon? The Chinese were working on that. Shouldn't we know what we can grow on Mars? Shouldn't we figure out how we can mine all kinds of raw materials that's flying around on asteroids? Aren't these things that we should be working on? Should there be a single child on the planet that doesn't have clean drinking water? Why do we have that now? Shouldn't the life expectancy of every person born today be something around 100 years old? Yeah. And shouldn't they know 5 languages and how to play the violin and the piano and sing, and have a chemistry set where they almost blew up their house by doing something in the basement, right? I mean, so when we think about where we are, it's twofold. One, we have to find the courage to stop evil, to stop it, to demand it stops. We need a ceasefire immediately between Ukraine and Russia. Just stop it. The Chinese have written an interesting proposal. The Pope has offered, Lula da Silva has offered. That needs to stop. But then what? Because peace is not merely the absence of war. So how do you create a world where there is no more poverty, where nations exist, sovereignty is respected, but we actually value the difference in language and culture, that we recognize that perhaps Al-Farabi or Ibn Sina, the contributions, where do we get the word algebra? Because there was an Islamic Renaissance with geniuses who produced something for mankind. What about Tilak? What about the ancient civilizations of India? What about Chinese history going back 5,000 years? Is there not something that we could learn? And what about the things that we have forgotten about in this country, like the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution? What about the purpose of why you create a government? What does it mean to form a more perfect union? What does it mean to establish justice? What does it mean to promote the general welfare? And is that not something that other nations could learn from us? They could if we embodied it, which we don't right now, but we could. So it is actually urgent that the United States work with China, with Russia, in particular, India. There is a whole new paradigm coming into existence. You saw what Xi Jinping and Putin are doing. They just met for 3 days. What happened going into that? Iran and Saudi Arabia. Well, everyone knew, didn't you all? They were always going to have peace, right? I mean, wasn't that obvious? Not. What about Armenia and Azerbaijan, which Russia's working on? Cooling out that. How about Turkey and Syria? Now, they're not exactly lovebirds yet, but things they're chilling down. How about Syria and Saudi Arabia? So there is a new dynamic which involves billions of people on the planet, where people have found a means of putting aside not small differences, major differences. Major blood has been shed. How about between China and India on border disputes and various things? Blood has been shed, and people are saying, you know what? Mankind cannot continue this way. We're going to have to rise to a higher understanding. We're going to have to grow up and actually become human. And that is possible. That means emphatically putting this dying, stinking carcass of a bankrupt derivatives, $2 quadrillion derivatives bubble. It means burying it, as LaRouche used to say, the Wall Street bankers, Wall Street system, bury it deep enough that you can't smell the stench. Bury it. Get rid of the Federal Reserve, set up a national bank, issue trillions of dollars of credit to build what we need in this country, and to work with other nations. What if the US said, instead of telling Haiti, and Joel can say more, that we're going to punish you if you work with China and you must work with Taiwan. We're going to have a one China policy here, which we don't obey, and we send Nancy Pelosi and this one and that one over to Taiwan. But you are not allowed to work with China. Well, what if the US and China were to collaborate with Haiti? What if the US and China were to collaborate on bringing Puerto Rico into a modern industrialized state? You know, they have a really critical telescope in Puerto Rico. It got destroyed maybe by sabotage, maybe by a storm. One of the most advanced in the world. Actually, it was first in the world for detecting asteroids and things that might hit us. And they had schools. They had school children in Puerto Rico going to this telescope and becoming scientists, getting totally, it doesn't exist. And our genius Congress, you know, the geniuses in the Congress, they said, no, we are not going to rebuild that telescope. So these are things that we could do to reverse the crisis. If our nation had a mission like that, people ask me as a kid, well, what are you going to do about school? Well, do you want charter schools? No, you know, if we don't have decent publication, we're done. I don't care if your kid goes to a charter school, is homeschooled, and they become a genius. If 99% of the children are illiterate and degenerate axe murderers, it doesn't matter that your child learned how to read. We have to have universal education of a very high standard. Why would anyone want it? Because we have to figure out how to get to Mars. We have to figure out how to solve these problems. That's how you reform the educational system. So that's the fight before us. We have to think big. We have to demand what is necessary As soon as you say, well, I'm going to only ask for X because that's what I think I can get away with, I'm going to only ask Joe Biden for X because that's what I think he's going to allow me to have. It's all stripes again. Okay. Then you'll never get anywhere. You say, no, here's what we need. Every city in the United States should be spotless. Every single person who is homeless and mentally ill should have a place to go where they're going to get the care that they need. If we thought we had to build massive high-speed rail, water management, do you realize the kind of workforce we would need? Could we call the people in prison expendable? Could we say it's not worth the money to train these people so they can work? No. So that's what we have to do. Now I'm going to stop, and I think Jose's got this under, or is this under control, Jose, now?
Yeah.
Good. Because what I want to do is just turn this over to Jose to let him tell you what he's been doing and his thoughts about this, and then we'll just open it up for questions. Thank you for listening.
Thank you. For the people who are at home watching this, the camera cuts every 30 minutes because it goes to sleep. Can't really do much, so I just have to turn it off and then on. So, you know, I know what I'm doing, I swear. And to the people here, I'm very happy to be in Texas. You know, I've never come out this way before to the Southwest, and so to be here really has been a blessing because I've gotten to know the people of Texas, and honestly, you are all very heartwarming and friendly and empathetic, and you know, I really resonate with your lifestyle out here. It's very different than the Bronx. I will I will say that. You know, people know me from my interventions, screaming at AOC and Mike Pompeo, Jamal Bowman, Kamala Harris, Hakeem Jeffries recently. That was a good one. You know, yeah, I do got a list of them. Espaillat, you know, and so I got it. Thank you. So, you know, people always ask me, what is it that exactly motivates me to do this? Or why is it that I'm able to do what I do and in the way I do it? Why is it that I'm able to do what I do and in the way that I do it? And part of it has to do with the fact that I've been a part of the LaRouche organization since I was about 15 years old. I'm 24 years old now, I'll be 25 in September. And I think one of the things that I keep coming back to when it comes to doing change for your government. How long do I have, by the way, just so I don't go on?
As long as you want. Ask them.
You know, I always
24-hour restaurants.
I always go at these, anything I do when it comes to politics or life, I always go at it from a higher level and a higher standpoint. And people always wonder, well, what does that mean, right? And then, you know, when I start talking about what I do, they say, well, what does poetry and art have to do with politics? And I guess one quick example I can give you is Dante's Commedia. And after I did the AOC intervention, I gave similar remarks where I mentioned Dante. And so I think it goes something like, nel mezzo del cammin di nostra vita mi ritrovai per una selva oscura, che la via diritta era smarrita. Midway upon the journey of our life, I found myself astray, alone in a dark wood. And so it goes on, and you know, that's the first canto, and it goes on to Dante, who's in the dark wood, and then he sees this hill, and he tries to go up this hill where there's a shining light and hope, but then he gets thrown back into the woods because these leopards stop him from it, and there he meets his guide Virgil. And Virgil says, okay, well, if you want to make it up to heaven, you got to get through hell first, then purgatory, and only I can take you that far, and then somebody else will take you up to paradise. Now, the reason I reference that is because when I read that, I understood, you know, like the United States is in a position right now where we are in a dark forest. And thankfully, along the way of fighting through hell and fighting through these these demons and going through the layers of hell, I have found other comrades who are also trying to get through these layers of hell. As Diane mentioned, people who would once spit on our name now, praise me and play my videos on their podcast all the time, right? I've gone from like no followers on Twitter to 25,000, right? And, that's not a lot and the bigger thing, but like in the span of October to now, it's, anyway, thank you. And, people do feel the desperation. People do feel also impotent. Like, well, my government is doing this wrong. The United States is doing this. They're an imperial nation. Everything's bad. Everything's wrong. What do I do other than complain? I think that's kind of the position a lot of Americans might find themselves in. All they can do is complain and say, I'll wait till next election. Some people have given up entirely and said, there's nothing you can do. So whatever, I'm just going to complain and we're going to go down in a sinking ship. And some people take maybe the easiest choice of them all. Forget it. I don't care. I don't care who's president. I don't care who's whatever. I'm just going to focus on myself. I'm going to tend to my own garden, call it a day. And that's probably also the most dangerous choice out of all of them. So what is it that the interventions have done that have actually inspired and rallied people? Because it's not the first time an intervention has been done. And in fact, there's been previous people before me in this organization who could probably tell you stories of times when they did it. And even a little more recently with the invention of social media, I mean, that video keeps going viral every now and then where the guy throws the shoe at Bush. Yeah. You guys know that one, right? There's a whole monument to him. Although that's not an example of nonviolence, I'm not saying you should do that, but that was pretty funny. There was also this guy, Mike Prisner, who was a veteran in the Iraq War, I believe. And then he goes to Bush Jr. and starts yelling at him and say, my friends are dead because of your wars. Apologize, right? And it was a very passionate and sincere kind of intervention. And that goes viral every now and then too. I think what sets the interventions apart from, I was on a stream a month ago or so. Some good friends of mine, we don't see things the same, but they were praising that a city was being burnt down because they didn't want a cop city to happen. And I can understand why people may be hesitant to have more police in an area, in a whole town, totally get it. But they were saying, look, they burnt down Arby's, and some people got shot by the police, and this shows how disgusting the police are because we were protesting and we have a right to be this way. And then they were saying, well, now we have to take up arms against these people because that's the only way they can hear us. It's the only way they can listen to us. We have to speak their language. We have to use violence against violence because otherwise nothing else is going to work, they say. And so they scream and plead. We have to arm ourselves and we have to, unite. And that's the only way a real revolution comes. And then when you have a shooter who shoots up a school in the name of her cause, in the name of her being a transgender person, suddenly it's, whoa, this is a national tragedy. Nobody should ever get behind this, right? But see, the irony there is that if it were for any other cause, if it were for a Black Lives Matter cause and she shot up a police station, would people still feel the same way? Or would people react the same way? People really need to ask themselves this, because when they talk like that, that breeds other people to say, well, if that's true for their cause and they feel as sincere and passionate about it, I feel just as sincere and passionate about my cause too. Therefore, I should take up arms and I should fight back at society because they're doing this great injustice to me. And whether they know it or not, that is what they support and that's what they breeded. But even on top of that, I don't even blame my, Americans who believe that, because the real reflection and ugliness of why this violence exists is that we have a culture of violence. And even before our media, after Vietnam, we've just been in perpetual war after war after war. And I make this point constantly. When the Columbine shooting happened, that same day, Bill Clinton launched the most bombs on Yugoslavia. Okay? Then what happens 2 years later? We have 9/11. Then we go into Iraq, right? You've only had school shootings go up since then. Syria, Iraq, Libya, Afghanistan, all of these places. Look, I'm 25 years old. I was born in 1998. By the time I'm conscious, around 4 or 5 years old, we're already knee deep in so many countries that you kind of just tune it out. It just becomes background noise to you. The United States presses their boots on all these countries to promote the rules-based order. And that's where this comes from. So of course I can understand why people would think violence is the only means to get your message across because, well, our government does it. And that right there is also the problem. Because if you think you're going to try and speak their language, the only thing you're going to find is you're going to end up dead. So why do the interventions actually outshine violence? Why is it, I believe that these interventions are what I call a creative action, nonviolent creative action, because the opposite of destruction is not inaction. The opposite of violence is not doing nothing, no violence. No, violence is inherently destructive. So if violence is inherently destructive, then the opposite of destruction is creation. And what are we creating when we do these interventions? You're creating a tension, a Socratic tension. This is what Dr. King talks about in his letter from a Birmingham jail, because he's asked, why do you do these nonviolent protests? There's no point to them. And he says, I don't often respond to my critics, but I will tell you what we're trying to do. We are trying to dramatize the issue. And you have to realize this is at a time when the Congress doesn't care about civil rights, okay? Most of the Congress people didn't get their votes from the people who are being oppressed. They didn't get their votes from people who were descendants of slaves. Why should they listen to you? You don't keep them in power, right? So think about that, right? They were in a worse off situation than we are because they don't even have that pressure to vote. And in one sense, you could argue we don't have that either because I don't think our elections are all that secure. I won't go any farther than that so we don't get off YouTube. But so King says, you have to dramatize the issue. You have to create tension, and it's a good tension. Okay, it's the same kind of tension that when Socrates was going around in Athens, and asking people and annoying people, well, how do you know what you know? Why do you know what you know? Well, are you sure what you think is right? What if it could be wrong? He's just annoying the hell out of people, creating this tension. And that's what you do with the nonviolent direct action interventions. You create a tension to where people cannot ignore your pleas, where people cannot ignore the issue. And the thing is, truth is on our side. When I yelled at AOC with my friend Kynan Thistleplay and a third friend who came to videotape it, who still doesn't want to, he's anonymous now, even more anonymous than before because he says, I really don't want anything to do now. It's funny, he didn't think it was going to blow up the way it did. I mean, none of us did. So he's like, definitely never mention who I am because they're coming after you guys somehow. So anyway, after I did that, I shut off a shockwave because other people started doing it too in the period between October and November. And we had something going for us, which was that it was election season too, right? The month before election season is like ripe for political activity. But it wasn't the first one I did because before that, I did Jamal Bowman. This is September 22nd, and Hakeem Jeffries was there, although I didn't direct my intervention to Jeffries. I stood up and I yelled at Bowman, and I said, because Bowman was saying, we could do more to advance gun control. We could do more to advance the Black agenda. We could do more. And I said, Congressman, you're a hypocrite, okay? Because the same people that kill in the name of white supremacy, you're giving them money in Ukraine, okay? You say you want to advance the Black cause, but you're giving money to neo-Nazis. And then at the time, there was a shooting, the Buffalo shooter up in New York. He shot and killed African Americans in a supermarket. It was a hate-based attack. What was he wearing? He was wearing the Black Sun symbol. That Black Sun symbol is a famous Nazi insignia that the Azov battalion uses in Ukraine, and it's something that the Nazis use, right? So either Jamal Bowman is really ignorant, and he doesn't know this, which I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt that he doesn't, or he's a hateful person who just is secretly a Nazi. Now, I don't think he's secretly a Nazi, and you can look at him and then you can figure out why. It's that these congressmen don't know what they're voting on. They really don't. A good example, recent example, Lindsey Graham. He's a senator. He's not a congressman, but there's this talk about banning TikTok and stuff. So they had this bill called the Restrict Act, and the Restrict Act doesn't mention TikTok at once. What it says is we have the right to monitor every American's internet traffic coming in and out. And if we catch them using something they're not allowed to use, we will give them a minimum of 20 years in prison and a $20,000 fine. And we can monitor VPNs. So people might be paying $10 a month to hide their internet. Government saying, no, we can bypass that. So Lindsey Graham gets brought onto Fox News by Jesse Waters, and Jesse Waters says, Senator, what is this? This bill is terrible. And this is after Jesse Waters went through all these, points. And Lindsey Graham says, no, I don't support that. And then Jesse Waters says, well, you're a co-sponsor on this bill. No, that must be some mistake because I don't support that. Yeah, that's unconstitutional, clearly. So what is going on? How could this guy who co-sponsors this bill doesn't even know what he's co-sponsoring, right? So when I yelled at AOC or Bowman or any of these, the squad, and Ilhan Omar got some heat too, not from me, but some of my friends, and Rashida Tlaib, the quote squad, these progressives, they don't see me, they don't see the person yelling at them, they see the person, they see themselves, but they don't see them presently. They see a version of them that had that fire and passion, who thought, I'm going to go into Congress and change things. What have I become? That's what they're thinking, and it haunts them. And I know it haunts them because AOC, after the very famous intervention went out, it took her 4 days to respond. She should have just ignored it, but she didn't. And what did she say? Oh, these are right-wing, Trump-supporting cults members. No one should listen to what they're saying. There's Putin propagandists, right? That's desperation. To feel that you have to respond and say something meant that we had a greater effect than we originally did. And then when Ilhan Omar was intervened on, what happened 48 hours later? They put out this letter from the Progressive Caucus Committee of the Congressional House. There's like 30 or so Congress people all signed this letter. Terrible letter, but it said, Mr. Biden, we support all the money you're giving, all the weapons you're giving. We love it. Please keep doing it. But could you please add just a little diplomacy? Please, you could keep giving them weapons and money and everything, please, a little diplomacy. What happened? Not even 24 hours later, got taken down. They all got a big slap on the wrist. But see, think about it. They put that out because Ilhan Omar got hit, and they felt like, okay, well, we have to say something because they're making us look like warmongers. And even our enemies, in a slanderous article that was put out, I won't even say who they were, but they put out this article recently that attacked Diane and our organization. Even they had to admit that our interventions made AOC and Ilhan Omar look like hippie punching warmongers. That's how potent these interventions are. And I've been screaming and yelling, telling people it shouldn't just be me doing them or my friends in the LaRouche organization. It shouldn't just be Kynan and I. I mean, we're going to keep doing them. And so that's why we started this intervention series class that I put together with the People's Party and Nick Brana and others. The goal behind it is to train people to do it. And, people say, well, you don't need training. You just need sincerity. I disagree. We've seen other interventions happen that don't go as viral or as big, not because it isn't sincere or it's on topic, but it is an expression of impotence, just screaming out saying, we don't want war, don't give us war. Well, yeah, okay, sure, fine. But what sets some interventions apart from another? The Hakeem Jeffries one also went international. The AOC one went international too. What do I mean by international? These videos were translated and subtitled in Spanish, German, Chinese, Russian, Portuguese, okay, French too. it just went nuts. And like the AOC one, last I checked, had like 45 to 50 million views. But that doesn't even count Chinese TikTok, because the Chinese have their own social media, and the Hakeem Jeffries intervention got 16 million views alone in China. So, right, I don't even know how many views these things have. And the fact that they also go viral again sometimes over and over again. People really, people do these remixes too, where they take it, they add the video, and then they add their own little commentary saying like, we all need to do this, da, 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 da. Okay, so now, on a pragmatic side, how do you actually do this? How do you actually get the courage to stand up to do it? I think that's kind of the question everybody has, and one, you really just have to do it. I mean, the way I describe the fear of doing it, it's kind of like when you're sitting down. Oh, sorry, Diane. When you're sitting down and you're waiting on the person, right? To, you're just sitting there, you don't even know what they're saying because you're just so nervous and scared. What's going through my mind is, one, what's my lunch? Why? Because the scariest part of an intervention is not what you're going to say. It's actually standing up and breaking the tension. Because there's a split second where when you break the tension, everybody's eyes just shoot at you. Diane, she knows what I'm talking about because she's done interventions too, right? Everybody's just looking at you. You have the spotlight for like that much. What words are you going to change the world? Exactly. That's right. What are you going to get out? And what do you also want the congressman to hear, or whoever you're intervening on? Because we haven't just done congressmen, we've done people who are on the board of the National Endowment for Democracy. We did Mike Pompeo. We've done journalists who are just like notorious Russiagators. People like that. So it's not just congressmen. Anybody who's an evil person will get shouted on. And so the moment you stand up, it's kind of like jumping in the deep end of a pool. You're afraid of jumping in. You're not afraid of the water itself. But once you jump in and you're cool, it's fine. When you actually stand up and you start going at it, you see it's kind of like flying. It's like your eyes go above your head for a second. No, really, it feels like your eyes are above your head for a second, and you're just like, whatever. I've got 1 minute to say what I need to say. And because of technology and the advent of social media, now we record ourselves on our phone. So even if they start speaking over us, we have the ability to get what we're saying, and that's going to be broadcasted to the whole world right there. So now, what do you say when you stand up? And so I wrote a guide on this with my friend Kynan, on what do you say and how to say it. It boils down to knowing the subject. And I wrote it in such a way that it could survive the test of time. I wrote it for posterity too. I could have just said, make sure you stick to Nord Stream and Ukraine. But 2 years from now, who knows what kinds of problems we're going to have that we have now. If we're still here 2 years from now, exactly, right? Or like this restrict bill, right? So I said, you have to identify the injustice at the highest level, because you can scream to Eric Adams about housing inequality. Eric Adams is the New York City mayor. You Texans, you may not know. You could scream at him, hey, there isn't enough housing. Okay, fine. But is that at the highest level? Why exactly is the reason that there isn't enough housing? What policies have been put in place on the highest level? Or what economic system? And it's the whole economic system. It's the banking system. Or Seymour Hersh gave us this gift with the Nord Stream 2 pipeline revelations, where he exposed that the United States did this. And what did the State Department do? Deny and bury it. So it's important for Americans to give the impression to our elected officials, no, we want to know the truth, and we want an independent investigation. Keep making a ruckus about it. You have to blow it up in their face, because that could end NATO if it comes out that the United States actually blew up the Nord Stream pipeline. But on a general sense, identify whatever injustice it is that you want to highlight and blow up on the congressman's face, and say, okay, what is the thing driving behind it? Because you could also say, like, oh, my community, my neighborhood isn't getting da-da-da-da-da. Because it isn't getting da-da-da-da-da, we have the highest asthma rates and da-da-da-da-da, we don't have healthcare. The defense budget gets like almost $1 trillion. every year. So if you want to be, fighting for healthcare, if you want to be fighting for, the rights of the homeless, if you want to be fighting for more education, you are inherently anti-war. Because why do we have $1 trillion budget for the military? That money could be reallocated somewhere else. My point is, no matter what the issue is, identify it at the highest level. And that will define what you say, and know it better than the congressman. Because they are ready with counterpoints that have been fed to them, weak counterpoints.
But they don't know much. I mean, was it Jamal Hogan who said Nord Stream is a pipeline?
Oh no, it was Richie Torres. Exactly. There you go. That's another good example. Richie Torres, my congressman in the Bronx, when I confronted him, and this was good, by the way, because I didn't have to yell at him, not in the beginning at least. He was taking questions. I said, what's going on? Like, you're my congressman. I want to know, why did we blow up the Nord Stream 2? And he's like, well, Nord Stream 2 is a pipeline that sends oil, it's gas, by the way, not oil from Russia to Germany. And I've had no word on that. There's an investigation going on. Thank you. And I was like, no. Like, what are you going to do about it, right? Because unlike the other congressman I yell at, like, you're my congressman. That's my guy. I didn't vote for you, but you represent me. I want you to do this. And so we had like a 4-minute back and forth. It was great. It was hilarious. But Diane's right. They don't know much. But if you're talking about something like Syria, you start talking about the sanctions, first thing they hit you with, well, Assad's a genocide guy. What are you? You support people who do genocide? Well, if you're just standing there like, well, then the table's been turned on you, flipped on you. You got to be ready to be like, actually, the Aaron Mate just testified at the UN Security Council, and he did a takedown of the OPCW report, and he talked about the whistleblowers, right? You got to be on point, because it's not just sincerity. You can be sincere, but you have to be truthful also, and you have to know what you're talking about. So, the AOC thing also was kind of like the barrier, or the flood that broke the dam, because people had this kind of rage against the Ukrainian war and really weren't sure, what can we do about it? Well, we've done some things about it. We've definitely increased the tensions. A lot more Americans aren't in favor of this war, and we're only going to keep pushing this tension forward. So I will just end my remarks, by saying, quoting Dante, that even though we are still in the dark forest, and the whole United States is, I'm happy to say that we're not alone. We now have a lot more allies and friends and people that we didn't know before. And we have built this broad coalition of left and right, everyone in between, everyone who disagrees with us, who completely agrees with us. And so we don't have to go through this trek alone, and going through all the layers of hell alone. We've got each other, and our Virgil, or really our Beatrice, has been Lyndon LaRouche. Because it's not just knowing what the problem is. Everybody knows what the problem is. I don't have to tell all of you what's wrong with this country. You could all probably come up with a bigger list than I could. What are you going to do about it? On 2 levels. What are you going to do about it now? What are you going to replace it with? You get rid of cancer in a person, great. Does that guarantee their survival long term, though? Housing, food, education. That's what guarantees a person's survival long term. And so our government's the same way. Our government has been hijacked by this cancer and corrupt people. Our whole Congress has really just been bought off by lobbyists and corporates, and our Congress people don't make decisions anymore. Everybody, banks. Now you get rid of that. What are you replacing it with? And so that's why our organization has been dangerous, because it's not just the interventions that make us dangerous, it's that we know what will work to replace it with. So I'll end it there.
AOC voted to remove the troops out of Syria.
So
Oh
if you
yeah.
change somewhat.
That's right. Yeah.
Okay, so, well, if people here have questions or comments, I got one from the internet.
Oh,
Maybe you
wow.
want to take.
What was that?
Somebody said, and Joel may have a response too, why do you always talk about going to Mars? You lose everyone when you say that. Yeah, maybe you're dressed for that question, so why don't you go ahead?
Why do I talk about?
I mean, you're the one who has this big space CCC idea.
Yeah, that's right. I have this. One of the things about talking about solutions is what do you replace it with? Look, in the South Bronx, where I'm from, and this is happening all over the country too, but I'm just speaking about where I'm from. The South Bronx used to be a major production place. It used to be like a real working class neighborhood. Oh, hold on, I'll fix the camera in just a second.
All right, everybody who's listening.
No problem. Yeah,
They can't hear either? They can hear, yeah,
Oh,
so
they can
Jose's
hear.
coming back.
I'll be right back. I just gotta unplug this and then.
Okay, he's
Turn that
turning the
on.
camera off and on again.
People are gonna-
No,
There
the
we
show
go.
is not over, so be careful what you say. There's millions of people listening.
There we go.
So-
We're back. Look at that. Yeah. So it's every half hour you got to do that. But oh yeah. So right, the South Bronx used to be a real working class neighborhood, and now when you walk it, there's like abandoned factories all along the Robert Moses Robert Moses Parkway in the Bronx. Right, and some of them have been refurbished to be like apartments or worse, as they did in the meatpacking district in Manhattan. They're like trendy restaurants now that cost way too much money. But the effect of that has been that you've lost the youth. What do I mean by that? People are dying due to suicide, drug overdose. They're all angsty and they're all full of they only care about their image, right? They only care about their identity. That's really where a lot of these quote identity politics comes from, because you have a generation that feels lost. Who am I? What am I? What do you put your identity in? And so the reason I have this space CCC idea, which is an idea where you take a poor area like the South Bronx and you put in a space science research center where you grab the youth who are between the ages of 17 to 26, high school dropout, high school graduate, college dropout, college doctorate graduate, juvenile delinquent, a felon who got out at 24. You put them all together in this program, you take them away from their neighborhood, you take their phones away from them, and you say, listen, for 2 years, you're going to be paid to get training on how to be an engineer, carpenter, a scientist, and you're going to go back to your community and you're going to build up the schools that you need, the housing that your community needs, the hospitals that your community needs, the infrastructure like trains that your community needs, maglev trains, okay? And that's how you're going to pay us back. So 2 years you get training, 2 years you work for us. Look at that. You have 2 years of training, 2 years of experience, and 4 years you've completely reoriented your whole neighborhood. You fixed your neighborhood. You've given an opportunity to youth, and you can have people who are in the retirement age, people who are union workers, union leaders, people who teach people how to actually weld and be engineers. You're saving 2 generations at once. You're giving people a purpose and you're giving them an identity, because their identity no longer is rooted in themselves, but it's in something greater than themselves. It's in the future. How many kids are going to be educated in that school? They're never going to know your name, but you built that school. How many kids are going to be born in a hospital that you built? Okay, who's the next great engineer who's going to take the train that you built to get to school on time? That's your identity now. And then they're going to go and do the same thing. So when we talk about going to Mars and the moon, these things are just like jumping off points to spur technological creativity and discovery. Because if you have a problem, you need a solution. Humans are best at making solutions, and we're really good at making problems. And we're even better at coming up with solutions. That's where we got the pacemaker. Because you think about it, like, okay, if we're sending 2 guys to the moon and we can't get them and one of them has a heart attack, what the hell do we do? Oh, what if there was a machine that could go in their heart and restart it in case? Oh yeah, it's a great idea. Well, how do we build something that can withstand super cold temperature and no pressure outside? Oh, I don't know. Let's figure that out. right? How do we create these relay devices that are wireless that can send and transmit information from the moon to us, or if you're in orbit from all of these things are the reason why we have computers and phones today. They spur technological growth that benefit us here at home on the world. For every dollar we put into the Apollo program, we got $7 back. So, yeah.
I think John F. Kennedy said it best when he asked, why does rice like Texas? In that great speech he gave here at Rice. Well, I remember when I was in the fifth grade,
No, we'll restate it. We'll restate your question. Go ahead.
and when I was in the fifth grade, and I saw Neil Armstrong come up that ladder and take that giant leap from that time, that inspired me to study science.
Mm.
And if you look at the technology that came off that, not only the technology, but it's the inspiration, like what Jose was saying about inspiring the youth. When I was in elementary school, there were no school shootings. There was the Vietnam War, but we had an idea that the future would be better. And if you look at what the Congress did, what the city of Houston became, and if you look at what happened when those astronauts came back to Earth, they were our ambassadors. They went all over the Middle East, all over Asia. They didn't have to have troops guarding them. They were looked upon as representatives of the whole human species. And if you look at the spin-offs today, because of those tours of the astronauts, the United Arab Emirates now has an astronaut on orbit on the International Space Station. So that's how we regain our value as a nation, is to give other nations something to work with us for into the future.
You know, and to add to that, if I may, to add to that, I think America.
Speak up a little more so we
Oh,
can
yes, absolutely. To add to that, I think America is in a very perfect point to be the nation to do that. We are very diverse as a country. We have some of the greatest minds on the planet. Like, these minds helped us win 2 world wars. You know what I mean? I think we were a little bit isolated from the first one, but the second one we were very much so involved in. And I think, you know, I'm very new to this organization. Like, I wouldn't even consider myself a member just yet. I definitely hope to come to more meetings. But I find it so inspiring to notice that, like, there's a very humanity-like centered mindset. I would say, like, the answer to the Mars question was such a great answer. It's the focus on humanity, the idea that we are bigger than these political problems that are going on in our country. We are bigger than these misdirections that, like, these politicians want to take us in, and that we are stronger as a nation. And I like to think that that is the American spirit. I really do. That was very inspiring to hear. It just really was.
This is Jaden Kennedy, by the way. Jaden. And this is Diane Sare, candidate for Senate, and Jose Vega,
Yes.
man of many talents.
Jose,
Thank you for your comments. Yes.
I was just thinking maybe you should go through a little bit about the CCC part of your proposal.
Oh, okay. Sure. I was asked to give a little bit about what the CCC part is, Civilian Conservation Corps. It's actually an idea that stems back all the way to FDR in 1933. We had just gone through a Great Depression, and you had all these kids who were, quote, unskilled and unemployed, who were between that, all these young men who were between 18 and 26, who, you know, they couldn't go to school, or they dropped out of school to help with mom and pop. They had no skills. So the CCC back then was the Civilian Conservation Corps. My modern day space CCC would be called the Civilian Construction Corps. Was the idea to educate these youth, was to get them out in the field, learning how to build, you know, some of these smaller infrastructure projects. A lot of our national parks today were built because of the kids who went through the CCC. And, you know, I actually met somebody who was like 90 years old or something, who was a part of the CCC, and, you know, told me he remembers being out planting trees.
My dad was in the CCC.
Yeah, his father was in the CCC. Joe Jennings' father
Well,
here.
Big Bend and the place he's staying were built by the CCC today.
There you go. Yeah.
All the trails.
All the trails were built by the kids in the CCC. So now they had training, and some of these guys went on to work in, some of these bigger infrastructure projects too. And not only that, but the whole modern day space CCC would take from all of FDR, because he had these wonderful videos called like a better New York, or a better Chicago, or better New Jersey. And you can see in this video, he's building the Henry Hudson Parkway. He's rebuilding the New York Public Library on 42nd Street. These are things that I use today that were built back in the 30s. And it's so beautiful because you see this like united mission in the whole country. Things aren't good, but but people are optimistic because they have a vision for the future. I'm waking up so I can go and build my country. I'm going to go build this highway. I'm going to go build this infrastructure project. I'm going to go bring water and electricity to this rural town that didn't have any. It's like beautiful. And so the Space CCC would go back to that and advance it forward, advance our people forward, our humans forward, take away the drugs from our culture and replace it with something beautiful like a wrench. Or a welding iron, But it's not just that, it's the culture too. I started by quoting Dante, because you have to fill the minds of people with something beautiful. Better than an AK-47, that's right. No, seriously, because like the whole point of classical culture, like Dante or Beethoven or some of these great painters and poets, is because the reason why they're so beautiful and they resonate so beautifully is because that beauty is actually innate within us. So all that does is it draws out the beauty that's already within you. So every human being who can understand and relate to classical music, which is everybody, who takes the time to learn and appreciate it, will realize that that's within them. That's what the Space CCC is about. So,
Thank you.
yes.
Great.
I actually have a question for
Go ahead.
Mrs. Sare.
You can call me Diane, that's fine.
Oh, thank you very much. Upbringing, southern upbringing.
That's good. We probably
Yes.
need more of that.
As a senator, how do you plan on attracting more people to actually come back to New York? How do you plan on promoting New York as the Big Apple? Because that's what everyone knows New York to be. Everyone, growing up as a kid, everyone always wanted to visit New York. Before they wanted to visit Dubai, people
Right.
wanted to come to New York.
Right.
So how do you plan on making New York attractive again?
Great. Well, that's a wonderful question. And I really appreciate it. And I have to say, LaRouche talked about Manhattan a lot because, that was the first capital of the United States. That's where George Washington was sworn in at Federal Hall, which has now been surrounded by Wall Street, the New York Stock Exchange. So unfortunately, a federal office, it is not my ability to change some of the state laws and city laws that have helped to destroy the city. But I think if our nation transforms and we put Wall Street under control by reinstating the Glass-Steagall Act and by investing in those things that allow people to be more productive, then we will have a kind of optimism and a love of human beings whereby a city looking like New York looks will not be tolerated. And I think the city, if you think about Alexander Hamilton, John Jay, Gouverneur Morris, who Jose's done a lot of work on, the city and Hamilton's idea of consolidating the federal debt under one government and not having all the states squabbling was a great point of unity. And what was the Statue of Liberty? The idea that all the immigrants would come through New York, right? So I think our identity, if our nation were good, became good again, committed to this mission, and the city played a role to that end, and the United Nations Charter, not all the other terrible British Wall Street funded things that go through there, the NGOs, I think it might not be that hard. Now, the infrastructure is a total mess. So it may be, I have heard some people propose we build another city about 50 miles away like they do in China. So you can move a bunch of people out of Manhattan so you can fix it. Because the subways, I mean, it needs a lot of work. And I don't know that all the work that needs to be done can be done while everyone is still living there. So I think there's a lot to it, but I think the most important question is cultural, because if you care for people, you will not allow them to be dying and defecating and doing everything else that they're doing on the streets of New York right now. You will find something that is civilized. I think the opera, we have lost, I guess it was New York City Opera that we lost. We've lost the attendance at many of the famous churches, which had phenomenal music programs, right? So the arts, we want to bring this culture of beauty and the dignity of man back to the city. And the city should be a capital for the world of unity, as it was for the United States. So that's my conception. How do we get from A to B? It's going to take a lot more people than just myself. But if others can get that vision, if we get Jose's Space CCC going up in the Bronx, then we'll get our city back.
How do you also plan on to work across party lines? Republicans, Democrats, conservatives, liberals, independents like myself, and bring everyone together, not just to rebuild New York, which would be a great thing, like you said,
Right.
you know, the Statue of Liberty, that is everyone who migrates from every country, when they finally reach here by vote and they see that green lady standing there in New York, their whole demeanor changes. They have a sense of, I finally made it to freedom. I finally made it to liberty. I finally made it to opportunity. I finally made it to change. I now have a chance. My children have it. They have a chance. My grandchildren have. We all have a chance. And that green lady in New York, she represents all of that. So how do you plan on working across party lines to bring everyone together? Because infrastructure is a problem, not just in New York, but all across the United States of America. When I went to the Pentagon in 2017, and I was invited there, my company was invited there. That was one of the things that attracted the contractors there in the Pentagon to me, because I said, you know, we have all these old Roman buildings. And when you go to Dubai, people go to Dubai because they have all of this infrastructure. They have all of these great buildings. And David Israel, he built an apartment complex that rotates at 360-degree angle. Your apartment can stand still, and then your husband's apartment can rotate at 90 degrees.
That's like when you don't want to talk to him anymore, you have this apartment rotate.
And so I was able to describe his technology and how he was able to do that. And I said, you know, Dubai is known for their buildings. What are we going to do with all of these? Because it was actually President Trump who started the infrastructure bill. He was the one who said when he got into office that he was going to focus on infrastructure. And I said, what are we going to do about these old Roman buildings? Why can't we now transform the buildings to make America even more attractive as a tourist spot?
Well, I think we have to actually teach classical geometry and work on things like the golden section and cultivating a real aesthetic sense of what is beautiful. Because I know the buildings in Dubai are very modern and unique. I'm not sure that I would agree that that's always necessarily beautiful. Like what they call modern music is not necessarily beautiful, right? So, but let me take the other question about the parties or the divide, because I think we're already seeing that. And then I want to because Joe had something. Look, this Rage Against the War Machine rally that I participated in was amazing to me. And Jose referenced it because we had people there who literally have yanked the microphone out of my hand at meetings. And everyone decided because, and also the co-conveners, I think being younger people had something to do with it, but the People's Party and the Libertarian Party have very different policies on many issues. That is, their disagreements were not minor, they are substantial. But they said, if we have a nuclear war, we're going to all be dead, and these disagreements are not going to matter. So why don't we concentrate on working together to be alive? And then once we're all alive and we've come to the other side of this crisis, we will fight out the things we disagree on. And we saw that spirit, I think, now carrying into, with the help of what Jose and others have done, the Getz bill to get our troops out of Syria. And people can say, well, it didn't pass, but it was 103 to 312, I think. Very different than 2 to whatever. And what happened is that he introduced the bill to say, under the War Powers Act, we have to get our troops out of Syria, and they have to be out within 15 days after the time this passes. Then, I don't know who talked to him or someone in his staff, but he got the idea that the Democrats would vote for that bill if he extended the time. So he made a compromise and said, all right, you have to get the troops out within 180 days. And then lo and behold, the Progressive Caucus mobilized to support his bill. And you got 56 Democrats and 47 Republicans, indicating we still have work to do. And he said he's not giving up, but also showing that when the people get active and demand their congressman do something, and you have a congressman who does something based on principle, lo and behold, these differences of party are not such a big deal anymore. Yeah, and I think that's the key. So
one of the Republicans who voted to get out of Syria was a real shock. He was my opponent in the
True.
of the 38th district, and I will be going to a meeting he's having next week to see what further steps need to take.
Wesley Hunt, the infamous, yes, exactly, which also shows the effect of running a campaign against such a person. Right, exactly.
You know, on that Syria bill, I had actually called Richie Torres, my congressman, and also George Santos. And I remember calling Richie Torres's office saying, my name is, Jose Vega, I'm a constituent, but I'd like for you to vote yes on the Syria bill because I have knowledge that George Santos is going to vote yes on this bill. That was a lie. And then he did vote, Richie Torres did vote yes on this. And it's funny because then I called George Santos's office and I said who I was. And the lady who answered the phone started talking my ear off like, oh my God, you're the guy who went after Richie Torres. And for my non-New Yorkers, Richie Torres and George Santos have kind of like a catfight going on where they just call each other liars all the time. And so, she was just like, yeah, so good. Oh, you went after Richie Torres. This is great. People shouldn't be so crazy. Like on and on. Like, so will he support this bill? Oh, absolutely. I'll let him know that you want this bill. And can I also get a number from you so we can?
I see. So you did that because he voted for the bill. That was great.
For the bill,
he was the only Republican in New York who voted for it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, good. Now let me call on Joe, and then yes.
Diane, I agree with your presentation there.
You might want to go over there.
No, they can hear him.
They can hear him.
Yeah, just project.
When you were discussing political parties, you said there's very little difference between them. I think George Galloway said it best the other night when he was speaking in Pakistan. He says, the parties are like my butt. The left cheek and the right cheek. And that sticks with me. But I keep thinking they're a tool. They're working for a higher power, and we're not addressing that. When Occupy Wall Street was around, we were attacking the oligarchs. We were scaring the shit out of Wall Street. And shouldn't we be doing more of that? Like Zelensky, the other day, he wrote this love letter to BlackRock, Chase, JP Morgan, and he tells them, come into Ukraine. It's going to be a beautiful, wonderful place that's free and we protect your property. Not the people, but we protect your property.
Right.
So, and the question for you, is our direction right? Should we not be going to Wall Street? Should we
Absolutely.
not be going to the banks and the healthcare companies and attacking those people?
The farm,
rather
yes.
than the politicians?
Well, we should also go after, see, the point is supposed to represent us.
Yeah.
So it's a flank, it's a point of leverage. You can get your lever under their butt and move them. But we should absolutely identify the enemy, because that's what's behind them as it is behind the war drive, which is this blob really located in the city of London, but also Wall Street. And it's not even the individual bankers. That's the odd thing. And that's why I think we have to think about it. You know, have you ever known anyone whose family has had a trust fund for like generations and generations, and the person's identity is not independent? It's as if they've become an appendage of this blob of money, that they have to act a certain way, that their life is, they're beholden to the trust fund.
Yeah.
So instead of the trust fund being an entity to be deployed by the person has become this thing on the end of this trust fund. And in a sense, that's what we're up against. With the exception of a few people, I think I almost choke every time I say it, King Charles is evil. He really is. I mean, his view that the world can only hold about 1 billion people, that he deploys the banks. Remember the COP26 conference, and they said, we have $140 trillion. We will not give a farmer a loan unless he puts windmills on his farm and stops growing food, etc. So you have people like that who have an ideology, who have a total racialist, pre-Nazi, eugenicist ideology that impose it on these other guys, and then they, like dirty prostitutes, carry it out. Jamie Dimon, for example, who really should be in jail, but does he really make the, I don't know that he does. I don't know that he's as evil as King Charles, but he absolutely is a criminal mind who is amoral, who has no compunction about the.
I remember him telling his teenage daughter that banks fail every 6 or 8 years. You got to expect this.
And then he scoops them all up and makes all the money.
Yeah.
Exactly. What I want to do, because I'd like to talk to everyone here less formally, is I want to close out the webcast to my New York people. So I just want to say a couple things, and this is for you too, but in New York, on April 15th and 16th, the Schiller Institute is having a major international online conference dedicated to creating this dynamic that we have to create of nations working together for a new paradigm. I will be speaking on one of the panels. It's from 9 a.m. until 4 p.m. on Saturday the 15th, and from 9:30 a.m. until